Alright guys, so you finished watching the part 1 on volume of the cylinders. We're going to go ahead and bring up part 2 now. So one more time, the video kind of got cut off because I can only record up to 15 minutes. But what it was saying is you're going to have, make sure your answers are always have cubed units, okay? So if we go back to the problem we were just on, it says what type of three-dimensional object is pool number 3? We already talked about this, but it's a cylinder. It's a cylinder. And all a cylinder is it has two equal circles and a height. Okay? So tying this back together, what we were talking about before, it says use the picture to describe how to find the volume of the cylinder. Describe each part of the formula and how does it work. So this says the volume, the area of the base. So what I want you to do is B equals area of the base, or area of the circle. And I want you guys to realize that equals pi r squared. And then the h is just height. So on today's formula, everything that we are going to look at is volume is equal to pi r squared times the height. So one more time, pi r squared tells us the area of that bottom circle. Pi r squared tells us the area at the bottom of the circle, and then we're just going to multiply by however tall it is. Okay? So let's go ahead and look at our first example. First thing that I always do is I write down my formula for volume of a cylinder is. So it's pi r squared times the height. First thing I need to double check is, do I have the radius? I do, because remember the radius goes from the center to the edge. So therefore r is 3, and my height is just how tall it is. So my height is 5. So when I plug this in, I'm going to have volume equals pi r squared, pi 3 to the second power, times the height. Now remember, orders of operation, we're going to do 3 times 3, which is 9, times 5 times pi. So this is going to give me volume equals 45 pi, and don't forget our units, it's inches cubed. Now one thing I want you guys to realize is the directions say round your answer, it says write your answer in terms of pi, also in decimal rounded to the nearest tenth. This would be your answer in terms of pi. You've multiplied all the answers and it says times pi. As a reminder, pi is an irrational number that goes on forever, so we can't write it as a perfect number. But what we can say is this is as accurate as it gets. The volume of this shape is 45 pi inches squared. Some people like when it's rounded to the nearest tenth. So what you're going to do is when you take out your calculators, you're going to multiply 45, and we're going to be using 3.14 in this class. So when I bring up my tools, I'm going to bring up my calculator really quickly. I'm just going to do 45 times 3.14, and I'm going to have an answer of 141.3 inches cubed. So you guys will actually have two answers. You'll have your most accurate answer in terms of pi, and you'll also have your answer written in the nearest tenth. So those are your two solutions. So now let's go ahead and look at this one. So this shape has a radius of 2.5 and a height of 7. Even though it's tilted on its side, I want you to realize we're finding the area of the base, which is this circle, timesing it by the height, which is 7. So once again, volume equals pi r squared times the height. This is going to be volume equals pi 2.5 to the second power times the height. So with our calculator, we're just going to do 2.5 to the second power. Oops. And that's going to be volume equals pi 6.25 times 7. Now, guys, really quickly, students always say they give me the final answer without showing any of these steps. Realize if you get it wrong, you didn't show any work. I can't give you any credit for that. So make sure you're showing your work. So when I multiply this by 7, I'm going to have my most accurate reading of pi, of the volume of the cylinder, which is 43.75 pi yards cubed. Now, this is our answer in terms of pi. We're going to find our answer rounded to the nearest tenth by doing 4.375, and instead of pi, can't write pi because it goes on forever, but I can times it by 3.14. that means it has about 137.378 yards cubed. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead now and look at this one. Sometimes I give you guys a description, and you guys need to come up with find the missing value. So whenever that happens, I personally just draw myself a real quick sketch of a cylinder. And so when I have it, it says I have this cylinder. It's a very poor cylinder, but I have a cylinder, and it has a radius of 21 and a height of 19. And it says find the volume. So this is just going to be V equals pi r squared times the height. So we're going to have volume equals pi, and then my radius is 21 squared times the height, which is 19. All right, so we're going to have volume equals, and we're going to do 21 times 21, and we're going to times this by 19. So I'm going to have a volume of 8379 pi, which is my most accurate reading. But then once again, I'm going to get my answer also to the nearest tenth. So we're going to do volume times volume equals 8,379 times 3.14. So I'm going to multiply it by the approximation of pi to get a little less accurate answer of 26,310. And this is round to the nearest tenth, so it'd be 0.1. And what is my units? Millimeters cubed. And I forgot to write millimeters cubed up here as well. Okay. All right, so now what we're going to do, it's going to try to trick us. It's saying I have half a cylinder. So it's basically saying if I have, here's part of the circle, it's going to get cut in half. Oops. All right, so this kind of shows half a cylinder. So it's basically a cylinder, and I cut it in half. I want you to realize, guys, I did not cut it in half this way. I cut it in half this way. Okay, so I just want you to realize what my drawing shows. And it says I have a diameter. Remember, a diameter goes from edge to edge. And it says I have a height of 9. So a few things I'm trying to trick you on this one. First off, I give you diameter. I don't want diameter for a formula. I want the radius. So the radius is always twice the much the diameter. So therefore the diameter, if I divide it by 2, will give me the radius. So I have a radius of 4.4 and a height of 9. Now nothing changes. I'm going to pretend to find the volume of the entire cylinder. So volume equals pi r squared times the height. But remember, I want to find half a diameter, so I'm going to divide this whole thing by 2 once I get my answer. So we're going to worry about that part at the very end. But it's going to look like volume equals pi 4.4 times 9. Okay? So we're going to do 4.4 to the second power, which is 19.36. And I'm going to multiply that number by 9. And that's going to give me 174.24 pi. That's the volume of the entire cylinder. But remember, what we're going to do is we want half the cylinder, so I'm going to cut it in half. So when I divide it by 2, I'm going to have volume equals 87 and 12/100 pi. So that is the volume in terms of pi of half the cylinder. But now, once again, we are going to find the approximation by multiplying it by 3.14 and 87.12. So once we multiply it by 3.14, I'm going to get an answer of 273. It says round to the nearest tenth, so in 6/10, and I am going to have centimeters cubed. Once again, I forgot to write centimeters cubed up here as well. Make sure you don't forget your units, okay? All right, let's go ahead now and look at the next one. It says draw and label your figure, describe, solve the problem, and show your answer. Round to the nearest tenth and write your answer in a complete sentence. Guys, it says round to the nearest tenth. I also, on your test, there's going to have majority of the answers are going to be in terms of pi. I want you to make sure you write it in terms of pi as well, if I could spell. Terms of pi as well, okay? So it says the volume of a cylinder. These are tricky because I'm giving you the volume. So it says, first off, draw a shape. We're working with cylinders, so here's my cylinder. And I'm going to say the volume of this is 117.1. And it says its height is 15. Now find the diameter. So how are we going to do this? Well, let's go ahead and plug stuff in and see what I need to solve for. So volume equals pi r squared times the height. So I'm going to have 117.1 is equal to pi r squared times the height, which is 15. So the first thing what I'm going to do now is I am solving for r squared. So I'm going to divide both sides by 15. So divide by 15. And that's going to give me an answer of 7.8 equals pi r squared. Now what we're going to do, guys, is divide both sides by pi. And like I said, we don't have a pi button on our calculator, so we're going to divide by 3.14. This is the best approximation we can do. Now I want you to notice I wrote 7.8, but in my calculator I'm going to leave all these numbers. This is going to give me the closest approximation. So what I'm going to do is divide both sides by 3.14. Alright, divide by 3.14, and I'm going to get an answer of 2.4862 equals r squared. Now guys, you have not learned this yet. We are going to use an operation to get rid of the r squared, so it's just r. This is called taking the square root. So a little side note here, what taking the square root is we are looking for two numbers that are exactly the same. So let's say I have that multiply to that number. So let's say I have the square root of 25. What are two numbers that are exactly the same that multiply to 25? It's 5. What is the square root of 81? Two numbers that are exactly the same that multiply to 81 is 9. So if I said, what is the square root of 100? Hopefully you guys would say 10. Now to do this, what we are doing is on our blue calculators, we are looking for this button. Or if you take out your iPhone, you turn your phone sideways, you're going to look for this button. Oh, it looks like this. Either one of these two buttons is taking the square root. So this is going to give me r equals, and my button looks like this. Hit the square root. It's 1.57. It says round to the nearest tenth, so it's 1.6. Now, it's only asking for this is the radius, and that means my unit for radius, it's just feet. It's not feet cubed, okay? Now, that's my radius, but the original question was asking for diameter. So I'm going to times this by 2 to get a final answer of 3.2 feet. Okay? Alright, so now looking at this one, it says the volume of a cylinder is 4,224.8 cubic millimeters, and it has a diameter of 6.18. Find the height of the cylinder. Alright, so here is my shape. So volume equals 4224.8. So that means that is going to equal to pi r squared times the height. Now I know my diameter is 16.4. So if I divided that by 2, that would be 8.2. Because remember the radius is half the diameter. So now I'm going to have an equation of 4224.8 is equal to pi, what we're going to be using is 3.14, times 8.2 to the second power times the height. So what I'm going to do now is just solve for the height. And I'm going to do this in the third and final video. Yes, third and final video. So I'm going to pause it right here, and I'll see you back. Go ahead and open up the next one, okay?